Thank you so much for coming back to the Babcock for another week of Friedkin. This week we have Lincoln Sevier back to do an introduction and a little post-film discussion about what you're about to see, which also brings back Roy Scheider in the lead in this one. This is Sorcerer from 1977. Lincoln, what are things people need to know before they see Sorcerer?
Yes. So this film came on the heels of both The French Connection and The Exorcist, which put him in the top tier of director talent in all of Hollywood. He can make anything that he wants to make with a big budget. He can do it how he wants to do it, and he picks a remake of a French film called The Wages of Fear, which was a very beautiful film, very powerful. And a lot of people say, why would you remake that? That film was perfect as it was. But Friedkin had things that he wanted to bring to it, and he felt like he could retell the story in a new and fresh way. And this was going to be his magnum opus. He felt like he could take everything that he learned in the other films and have this be his crowning achievement. And it was going to be the biggest film of the summer of 1977, which happened to be the summer that and nobody was paying attention to what Freakin was doing. The film flopped, and it became kind of the beginning of his downfall. It was not until 20 or 30 years later that critics returned to the film and said, "Oh my God, he made something really, really special here."
Not only is it sort of a downfall for him, but I have seen people rank it up there with like Heaven's Gate and some of these that kind of ended that new Hollywood movement that we had talked about with the French Connection kind of spearheading.
Oh,
Uh,
interesting.
this one kind of came to the tail end of that. It kind of had a bloated budget. It kind of was these maniacal filmmakers just going out and doing reckless things. Apocalypse Now, Heaven's Gate, and this. There is a reason that there are two studio titles at the beginning of this.
They were all trying to manage the dumpster fire that is the Sorcerer. And that's a really good point. After those films, Apocalypse Now, Heaven's Gate, Sorcerer, the studios finally said, we got to stop throwing money at these auteurs because it's not necessarily going to be the right move.
And there just so happened to be another big film that summer that they did start pouring that money into. So,
So it wasn't appreciated at the time. In retrospect, it's considered one of his most beloved films. And I am very excited for people to see it tonight.
and we will talk some more about it after the film. So enjoy Sorcerer. Whew. So that was Sorcerer. That is a thrill ride, I know. So I'm glad you guys stuck around to hear us talk about it a little bit. I'm back with Lincoln Sevier. What a harrowing film.
Crazy movie. And I'll tell you that scene on the bridge, I think that's one of the most expertly filmed scenes ever made. Because they did not have visual effects back then. The roaring river and the truck on the thing. Like, of course, they had special effects. They had a rig set up for it and all of that. But a story about the bridge. He finds a body of water where they're like, okay, we would build the bridge over this body of water and it's properly rushing. And we know that we're going to shoot the scene in 3 months. And they build this $1 million bridge with all of these joists that basically set it up so that vehicle can't tip over. It's connected by cables. As they're going along, they notice the water lowering in this river. And the locals say, oh, that's not normal. It's a particularly dry season or whatever. And it lowers and lowers to the point where when it's time to shoot, it's almost dry. And that doesn't work. So they packed it up from the Dominican Republic and they brought it to Mexico and they reassembled the bridge. The whole scene ended up costing something like $3 million to make, but he knew that it was like the centerpiece of his film.
It's the poster.
It's the poster. Kind of like the car chase in The French Connection was the centerpiece. This was going to be the centerpiece and he had to get it right. But to watch that film and know that everything was in camera, everything was captured in the frame. You couldn't add stuff in post production. Just blows my mind.
The obstacles in their way. There's something very deliberate about the way that, a lot of films, there's an obstacle they must overcome, and then you have a little bit of downtime until the next thing. This one, every single thing
Mm.
that they hit is immediately followed by something else. The rope bridge is immediately followed by the fallen tree, which is immediately followed by the mercenary. Well, I guess the explosion of the other
Yeah.
truck and then the mercenaries. We thought there was going to be a little bit of downtime right before the other truck exploded because they were kind of having this heart to heart, getting to know each other, and then boom, they're gone.
Yeah, boy, the journey they go on, I would just want to die. Like I would just want it to be over. What I found so fascinating about The Wages of Fear and then The Sorcerer is how can you make an edge of your seat thriller with a car that's driving about 20
Yeah.
miles an hour or 15 miles an hour? I just put a bunch of nitroglycerin in the truck. That's going to add the intensity. And so they do a good job of kind of setting up those stakes so that when you're watching them go over those potholes and stuff, your heart's in your throat. But when
Hmm.
you get to that bridge, my God, that bridge, like I have that bridge in my dreams. It was
Yeah.
so well done.
So you mentioned in the intro that it's an adaptation of a book that had already been adapted back in 1953, The Wages of Fear, which I had seen first. I actually saw it with you.
Yeah,
uh,
back in college.
and I remember just knowing nothing about this film, just knowing that it's in the Criterion Collection, and we watched it, and it's still one of my favorite films. And I had only seen Sorcerer this year. If gun to my head, I would still say that Wages of Fear is my preference, but both of these are so good. And they do take different approaches to how they set up this journey across the jungle.
Yeah, in Wages of Fear, they don't tell any backstories. These are just four kind of desperate men who
Hmm.
are given an opportunity, a dangerous opportunity to get out of their plight.
It's much more a story of capitalism than it is about fugitives from the law.
Exactly. And that was what stuck with me so much was this idea of oil is money and we're losing money and we need to get this dangerous nitroglycerin. I remember in The Wages of Fear, it was like, we can get it over the mountain in 2 days, or we could go around the mountain in 5 days. And what's the money that we're going to lose going around the mountain, even though that's a smooth road? But if we go over the mountain, we would save this and that. And so there were decisions based on money, and these people who are taking on the job are making decisions based on fear and on money. You're right. That was a film more about capitalism. And this one was as well, but this seemed to be about, he didn't want it to set it up as a, let the audience put themselves in the shoes of these men. When you tell a story about men and you don't give them backstories, you're asking the audience to kind of take that position. With this one, by telling the story of each of these men, we're less inclined to relate to them because we're not drivers for the mob and we're not hitmen. But what he does there, similar to Popeye Doyle, is he's telling stories of kind of irredeemable people. These aren't people that you feel warm towards, but you find them in this just a hellscape. Like when you see the disregard for people's lives in this country, yeah, we all know there's children in factories making shoes, and we're steps removed from that. What this shows you is like where our oil comes from is a hellscape that you wouldn't want any part of. And they don't follow the same rules of quality of life or pursuit of happiness or safety measures that we follow. I'd like to think that that's not the case today. In showing us how terrible this environment is we need to believe that in that situation, we would also put everything on the line to get out of it. And he does a good job with that. After he sets up those work conditions, you realize, like, my God, every day is a danger. Going on this trip isn't that much different. One of the things I liked is in Wages of Fear, he sets up that there's just this nitroglycerin that needs to be transported. In this movie, he sets up that it was poorly stored dynamite. It's a
Yeah.
it's a human error that's created the whole thing. So all of it dealt with poor management and bad decisions. And now these are the guys who get to be the carriers of that burden. And to
Hmm.
send two trucks,
Knowing
and
that
they
one
only
won't
need
make it.
one.
Yeah.
They only need one, of those boxes of dynamite. They have four of them. They only need one to make it. I thought that was a fascinating storyline that really pays off at the end when he's a
Hmm.
mile, two
Yeah.
miles from his destination and he carries it. That's such a great moment where he carries it. And when they take it over from
Yeah.
him, he just collapses.
Collapses. Yeah.
That was cinematic in a way that I don't remember The Wages of Fear being cinematic.
It's a full 25 minutes of just
Wow.
their backstory. They don't even leave on the trucks until over an hour into the film. For me, first time I watched it, I was like, did I put on the wrong movie? Because we're in
Because you knew
Jerusalem. We're
what
in,
Wages of Fear was, right? Why are
yep.
we in Jerusalem
Yep.
right now? Yeah.
It's kind of funny how three of his films, French Connection starts in France. It doesn't even start with Popeye Doyle. It's The Exorcist opens up in Iraq,
Yeah.
and it's like
Yeah.
totally not even the story that we're set up to see. And Sorcerer does the same thing that kind of
Yeah, it's
sets
just
us
kind
up
of
in these
setting the
in,
tone.
and yeah, unlike Wages of Fear, where these are desperate men, the money that they would make transporting this dynamite in Wages of Fear is like life-changing money to them. It's like $2,000. For these men, it's the promise of being able to do something that in the end probably isn't going to change their situation. And then once he is even given the check, which he's like, what am I going to do with a check? I need cash, sort of
Yeah.
thing. And they're sort of saying like, you know where you should go? You should go here. And he realizes that it's not going to change my situation. I am still
Yeah.
being hunted by these mobsters.
Yeah, and the idea of him being killed by these mobsters after all of this harrowing journey shows that like you can't run from yourself.
It's sort of this inevitability of your fate that
Yeah.
you have little control of it, and whatever it is, it's inevitable.
I was so fascinated by this movie because I watched it and I got such a thrill out of it, and I had to look into it. I was like, what went so wrong during the French Connection? I was talking about how William Friedkin had learned to trust his judgment over all the naysayers. In The Exorcist, he cast somebody who nobody had ever heard of because he saw that person. He said, "No, that's the guy. That's the guy who has to play the father." And in the French Connection, Gene Hackman was somebody, well, this was his first lead role. And they wanted to give him somebody with a bit more clout. And he said, no, I know this is the guy. So he had a string of making decisions that ended up being the right decision. And the big decision that he wanted for this film is we have to film in like the depth of Ecuador, the depth of the Dominican Republic. Like we have to have vistas that nobody's ever seen before. And that ended up being a tragic mistake. And the reason for that is he was at the top of his game and he wanted Steve McQueen in the lead role. And Steve McQueen read the script and he said, this is great. I'd love to do it. But Steve McQueen was freshly married with Ali McGraw and they were kind of attached at the hip. So he said, could we do it? I'm sure there's areas in California where we could find this stuff. And Friedkin said, nope, can't. We got to do it deep in the jungle. So he walks away from Steve McQueen. Next up, they considered for another role the great Italian actor who was in 8 and a Half, Marcello Mastroianni. But he didn't want to be away from his daughter for 3 months. So he's saying if you could film it in somewhere in like near a city or whatever, I would be open to it. Wouldn't do it. They wanted Robert Mitchum, and he loved Robert Mitchum. Robert Mitchum's a great actor, but at this point in his career, he's kind of doing it for the paycheck. So again, he's like, look, I'd love to be in your film. I'll give all my Robert Mitchumness to you, but I don't want to like go into some hellhole to do it. And so in his belief that he's got to go to a country nobody's ever filmed in before, he lost a lot of these big actors that would have been a part of it because of that. What he realized later on is there's absolutely no environment that's going to outweigh a close-up of Steve McQueen. He felt like people would come to the film because he is William Friedkin. And what he learned is that that's not enough to bring people to the movies.
So tell me about the title Sorcerer. Where does Sorcerer come from?
Another big freaking mistake. It was the name of one of the vehicles. He ended up regretting that because it gave false impressions of what it was about.
The film opens on this close-up of a like native statue, and the face of it, it's got these two eyes and this sort of like big menacing mouth, and it looks a lot like the face of Sorcerer, the truck, that it has this very
Oh,
similar look to it.
but you're right. Those trucks were really designed to kind of look like
Hmm.
monsters
Yeah.
barreling through the country. Yeah.
Yeah, a little bit like the truck in Duel has a face to it that looks menacing.
One of the details that I learned was advice that he took, which ended up helping the film, was he shot the entire film without the close-up on the dashboard with the odometer. The studio said it's a little confusing how far he has to go. It's a little confusing how far away he is from the thing when he arrives. Could you cut to some close-ups? But he heard it enough times to say, shit, I think I need to do this. So those close-up shots where he writes, okay, I'm going 182 miles, and here's the odometer, whatever. Those were inserts that I do think helped. Because when he does arrive to see the odometer and see how close he is, I think that allows the character to say, I think I can make it. Just a phenomenal filmmaking, beautifully told. The ending was very like such a drag. The early 70s filmmakers were into those gritty
Yeah.
drag of an endings, and this was the summer of Star Wars, and I think shortly after Rocky, and the country was kind of taking a turn. They wanted to walk out of a movie uplifted, and this movie
Yeah.
didn't offer them that, and that ended up not working in its favor, you know.
So, yeah, that Sorcerer, a great one. I'm so glad you guys were here to check it out.
The film that we're showing next week is the one I'm the most excited about. I think I said that about The Sorcerer. Cruising. Cruising is going to blow your mind. Cruising, similar to Sorcerer, is one that got absolutely panned when it came out for reasons that are very interesting. We can get into next week, but over the years has become a very critically acclaimed film. What is exciting about Cruising is it ties to the French Connection. In the French Connection, the two cops that the story was based on were his technical advisors in that movie, and he stayed in touch with them over the years. And one of the stories that one of these cops told was about going undercover to these New York BDSM clubs. Friedkin got to visit one of these clubs and was fascinated in this world, this underground world that he'd never seen before depicted in film. And he said, I'm going to tell a murder mystery story and base it in that world. And that's what Cruising is. It's a fascinating, very well made film. So I look forward to seeing it with you guys.
I am as well. So, thank you so much for being here, and we will see you next week for Cruising.